Over the last several months, you've heard me talk about being an employee. We've heard about entrepreneurs. We've talked about folks who are right to be entrepreneurs at 8%, 92% being employees. Well, today we're going to talk to somebody who made the leap from being an employee to being an entrepreneur, why she made the leap, what was her vision, what is she doing with Hemlane. And Dana, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me back on today.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the beginning. You're an employee at a Silicon Valley tech company. You're
hmm
doing really well.
Yeah.
You suddenly get this itch or desire for creating something from scratch, aka since became Hemlane. Kind of explain that process because that's a leap that not a lot of people make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me back up and say today, maybe not right now, given the tech climate, but a couple of years ago, one of the things that frustrated me most about technology and just the startup environment was the fad. And so
Yeah.
folks were starting companies just to start a company to say, I run a startup, I'm the founder of a startup. So they would really like go to networking events, talk to other people and be like, okay, what company are we going to build? And try to think of an idea and come up with one. And don't get me wrong, there's a couple of those that do work.
Mhm.
Um, but I truly believe majority of them don't, because that vision the vision is it's really hard. Putting together like a design and innovation system is not something that happens by like sitting there with a pen and paper and writing
Mm.
it out. It's almost something more creative than that. It's something that comes to you and then you're thinking about it almost in your sleep every single night, and you're running through it and refining it over time until it becomes something that changes an industry. And so I want to start with kind of that caveat of I wasn't one of those folks who said, "Okay, great, I'm working at a big tech company. Let me go start a
Yeah.
company." I actually never expected to start a company. So it basically stumbled upon me just through a sequence of events.
Right.
So the first thing I would say about the problem is it was personal to me. So when I first started thinking about what to do in the rental industry, my older sister and her husband had approached me and said, 2009, we're purchasing, there was a property in Denver. We're
Mhm.
purchasing a property. Would you like to get involved? It's a good time to purchase. I didn't really realize how good of a time it was to purchase. In hindsight,
Not
you're like,
bad.
oh,
Not bad.
yeah, and you're right out of college, so you, like, don't understand these things. You're not thinking about it every day of, where interest rates are, where property prices are. So, in hindsight, wish at that time would have picked up a ton of properties. But besides that point, it was one of those things where I realized that the purchase of the property is actually pretty easy. The management was the more challenging part. And actually, what was challenging about it was, one, being remote and like physically not being there. But two, even if you are there, like if you can fly out, we would go out and like, ski at Vail or do, some weekend thing there as an excuse. You still don't have control when you are not managing it in real time. And I actually think property management systems, how they're built, is completely flawed.
Mm.
And how they're built is that none of the conversations are shared with the owner. So the owner
Yes.
gets owner statements. They get, their financial reports, like their P&L and stuff like that. But they don't actually get in their rent roll, and there's all the standard reports, but they don't actually get the details of the why. And a lot of times it's too late. And so back then it was 2000, I think, 10 at the time. And and this was well before starting Hemlane. That's why I'm saying like these ideas don't just
Yeah.
happen overnight. Um and one of the tenants needed to be evicted. And it was like, well, why? Like, did you guys run a background and credit check? What did the background and credit check show? Were they kind of on the lower end? And there were a lot of questions where through, and I can't remember what the property management portal was the manager was using, but there was not this transparency with it. And so that's when it was the concept of, okay, let's think about self-management.
Mm,
And so really kind of fast forward to Hemling and starting it. I actually don't think I would have started it without having met my co-founder. That was like a huge, a big thing, someone who is like highly technical. And then two, if I hadn't been able to spend the next 5 years kind of thinking about, yeah, we have this problem in the industry, but how to solve it. And usually if you go to a an owner and you say what could be better with your property manager, they'd say, "Oh, well, I want cheaper. I want the property
yeah.
manager to charge, half of what they charge." And, on top of that, I want to make sure there's guaranteed rent, but I'm not willing to pay more for it. And so when you kind of think about if you were to go to an owner and ask for a solution, it wouldn't have been Hemlane. Like the
Well, you know
actual
what? That's really a good point because I remember you calling me, right? We have a mutual friend, Chris,
yes,
who kind of
yeah.
made us an introduction. And I think my feedback to you when we talked very early on, I don't know if this is pre-hem lane, but it's certainly pre-code, um, was very much that. It was like, hey, my interactions with my PM, which, oh, by the way, at that time, I had the PM I still have today. So
Yeah.
it wasn't one of the first 5 that I fired. So I have a good relationship, all of that. But it was very much, well, I get a report, I get a couple of phone calls, and I hope it all works out. I did like what you did with Himlang is you attacked incremental services
Mhm.
that I didn't even know there were applications for, right? Advertising, repair requests, eviction, helping with evictions, all of those acute pain points are really a process where I, as an owner, was like, I'm only seeing results. I don't even know if the results are good or bad, but they're results.
Mhm.
You're right. You now give the history, the context, the ability to go back. Because when I started, it was all freaking fax machines and photocopies. It was crazy.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because even back then when I met my co-founder, we started talking about the idea. We started a company that was just background and credit checks first. So
Mhm.
much more of a cash flow company of that personal pain point of never want to go through an eviction again, type scenario. And with that, what was really interesting about it was we we knew what the problems were, but we didn't quite know how to solve them. And a lot of times you listen to a customer and their feedback on how to solve the problem, and you say, okay, it's sort of like the Ford quote where when if I were to listen to people, they would have told me to build a faster horse rather
Right.
than a car. It is very similar to that. And I can
Oh,
give
for
you a
sure.
couple of examples. One was like repair coordination. We had a lot of folks tell us, great, that repair coordinator should be the handyman on the ground or be localized.
Mm,
And we actually did try that model. Don't get me wrong. We wanted to A/B test everything. And it was really clear that actually having coordinators who still had relationships, but the relationship was based off of performance
mm,
and numbers and prices and consistency rather than the buddy who grabs drinks with the guy down the street was
mhm,
actually really, really important to us. And a lot of the like top service professionals we have don't have time to do that. They're hard workers. They work really hard. They know they're always going to get paid through Hemlane. They always make sure, that their quality is there. We're fair to them, they're fair to us, and we bring them more business because of it. And so, thinking about it, that was one thing. And then the other thing was this huge point about cost. Owners always said, hey, and this is why 72% self manage. I don't want to pay the 8 to 10% if you're just starting out and you have 1 to 2 rental units. And if you think about it, you can't actually go and get a property manager who's cheaper or build a tech platform that does the work, but then you still have a property manager, but you underpay them. Underpaying people means you just get lower quality people. And it just doesn't work. And so for us, it was really clear we needed to unbundle things
mhm.
and figure out what is the owner okay doing or what is it that actually gives them delight to do in the system. So for example, one of the things we noticed, because we have leasing agents who show the properties as one of the options, and owners, and what we found was literally 10 times out of 10, the owners wanted to nitpick the listing description.
Mm.
They always wanted to change something about it. And so it was like, well, why is there double work? If you're talking about, the agent putting together the listing description and the owner, why wouldn't we just pre-populate everything that, public records has there? Use AI if someone has writer's block, which we have now, but have the owner go through and be able to update things as they feel appropriate of, do they want pets, et cetera, in the property. And so for us, from that perspective, it was really important to empower the owner and not make it feel like work, but give them that control. And then everything they don't want to do of picking up those phone calls or actually going out and showing the property, all of that is where we could really innovate and provide either a marketplace or some sort of technology solution to solve it and really optimize it. But yeah, it basically made it where we created this new category, between do it yourself management and full
Mhm.
service, where we said, hey, there's something in the middle and you can choose what you want. And what we found was no real estate investor is the same. Like, I have a finance background. I love looking at numbers all day long. I don't need someone to help me look at the numbers and the statement of cash flow or anything like that. But if someone asked me to, like, troubleshoot a washing machine repair, no way. I still call our maintenance team and ask them, like, how do you do
Help,
this?"
help.
Yeah, and so but then there's other folks on Hemlane who are general contractors, and they wanna take that over, but when it comes to the accounting side of things, they're like, "What's a GL account?" And
Mm.
so really taking those insights and saying people get into real estate for different reasons. All these small mom and pops are different. You have to meet them where they are and unbundle it. We were able to provide that alternative solution that is completely different than what has ever existed in the market before. And what was interesting with building it was it started where the folks who used us were kind of out of state investors who had like such a high need and pain point for
Yeah.
something like this. But then what happened was people would start using us for their properties down the street and say, I have a need for certain parts of it. And then
Mhm.
property managers would come to us and say, I'm having a really hard time, actually getting really strong employees. I'm the face and the person who talks to the owner. Can I use your software? And services as well. And so, really, just looking at how do we make it a much more delightful experience. Now, with those property managers who come to us, we say our mission and vision is still that the owners feel empowered, and that will never change.
Mm.
And why that's so important of empowering the owner is there's certain things that a property manager would say, like, "Hey, can you hide those tenant messages I never responded to from the owner or whatever?"
Ah!
And we're like, "Nope,
Nope.
everything is in there."
Everything.
Now, the owner doesn't get any of the notifications or anything like that, but this is their property. And so still that empowerment and, for the owner where they have more control is still always been part of that vision and mission. And don't get me wrong, there's some people, a small percentage, who say, I don't ever want to hear about the property. I don't even care how much you charge me on repair bills. Just do it and send me the check. And we always tell them this is not the right solution for you
No.
then.
Yeah.
This is not the solution. We're trying to optimize your cash flow. We're giving you control and power over the trust in that and the trust in us and the trust in the folks on the platform. And you have control to change those folks out. If you don't like that handyman, great, use a different one. But that's really what we stand for. And so it was really important to, like, over time figure that out. And then I think you're right, Michael, when I first met you, and that was back when we were just starting, we were doing the background and credit checks at that time. But even when we first started Hemlane, people didn't understand it. They were
Yeah.
like, so are you a software company or are you a property manager? And we're like, well, we're a platform. We're a platform where
Right.
you can get both. And it's very interesting because it is similar to, like, people weren't searching on Airbnb for, like, Airbnb. People weren't searching for, they would search for a hotel room in, Seattle. They
Right.
wouldn't search for, I'm looking for someone's guest bedroom. And so we draw a lot of parallels to that because there is still this learning curve through Hemlane of letting folks know what we do and why we do it. And And then there's this delight factor because folks ask, well, how do you get good reviews and how do you maintain, 4.6 star reviews when all your competitors have much lower? And we say, because there's no surprises.
Right.
Everyone knows exactly what's going on and they have the
Cards are face
power.
up. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
they have the power to change things. If their tenants are late on rent on day 2, they know.
Yeah.
And they know exactly what the next steps are. Here's what's happening. Here are the 3 next steps you could take. You can decide which one. Here's the pros and cons, but here are the next steps to take. And so I think that empowerment and that trust is built. I've always found this even with hiring people. Trust is built over time as you get to know someone. And so I always tell people when they come into Hemlane, we have a very strong culture. Very
Mhm.
strong culture. At the beginning, you need to over communicate. You need to tell
Right.
us everything you're doing, why you're doing it. But there will be a time you're continuing to communicate and documenting everything you're doing and all of that, but people trust you and they don't look at it as much.
Mm.
It's the same in property management where at the beginning you're like, "Oh, I'm not quite sure with this property manager. I'm not sure if they're good. I'm not sure if this platform's good." You need to be able to communicate. At some point, people are like, "I don't even need to look at the repair messages or anything. They've got it." But that trust is built over time, and you'll build that trust on day one. You build it through a relationship, and that is incredibly, incredibly important, I think, especially in the people business, which is what property management is.
Yeah, I think there's no question that Hemlane's definitely a platform now. It's also very critical that you had that vision years ago. Talking about local managers or local owners, Dion, right, who's a frequent guest on
Mhm.
our channel, uses Hemlane for part of the process, right, for advertising vacant units when they come about. But I actually want to go back in time and talk about that moment where you said to yourself, got your husband's approval, I'm going to quit this tech job and we're going to start. I'm going to go all in on this
Yeah.
vision, right? Talk about that kind of that moment for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was so passionate about this actual problem that I didn't really think through the logistics of what I was about to do. So I just gotten out of business school, which means I had 0 money in my bank account. I had even sold my car, so I didn't even have a car that I could sell because I sold it before I went to
You
business
sold it
school.
before.
And so I had nothing, like, I had, like, a backpack and that was it, and, at that time, I had 2 opportunities. One was to go to Google because I was working at Nest. I'd done an internship with them. Even though it was full-time business school, I was doing an internship, with them on the side and then also so through school as well as full-time during the summer. So I had an opportunity to go back to them and I absolutely loved Nest. I have to say, like, as a company, I loved it. I also really, really enjoyed Apple because I had left Apple to go to business school. And so I also had the opportunity to go back to Apple. Both really great jobs, very almost, I would say, not stressful because you're working with top talent. There's like really smart people there. Everything just gets done. And then
Mhm.
also there's like very much of a work-life balance because you always have someone else there who can like pick up things. Like you actually like we're
Yeah.
on vacation and things like that. And so I had actually really, really high salary offers back then. Tech was booming. And so really high offers to go there. And the one thing that said made me say I'm going to do the startup was actually my co-founder, Frank, because I knew how good he was technically. And I knew, hey, if this doesn't work out in a year, 2, maybe even 6 months, if we can't do it, I can always go back to Apple and Google and say, like, please, please give me a job. I'll take a
Yeah.
pay cut or whatever. Just give me a
Yeah.
job. And so Frank and I basically I declined both offers, and Frank and I went in and started Hemlane. I think the reason I said I didn't really think it through was then I was like, oh, I'm not making any money. And so my husband, who was my fiancé at the time, it was really funny. He always laughs about it. He's like, when I first met you, you were working at Apple, you had a great job, you had a really nice car, you had tons of money saved. And he goes, and like now I'm having to support you. and pay our rent and everything. He's like, what did I get into? This is not going the way I wanted it to.
It went backwards.
Yeah, it went backwards. And so then, obviously his job started paying. So he started paying for rent and actually all of our bills. He paid for everything. I think the benefit of it was well, there were two things. One, I have to say 50% of your success will be that other partner.
Mhm.
So your significant other, and then obviously your co-founder, is the other 50%. So with my husband, his parents were entrepreneurs.
Mm.
So he went through the exact same things of the highs and the lows. And at the beginning, there's no money coming in. And so he was okay. He was okay living very frugally. I mean, we lived in this tiny 400 square foot apartment where actually it was an apartment complex where most people had eviction notices on the
Oh,
doors. Like it
wow.
was like
Yeah.
that type of place.
Mm.
Um and it was actually good because I was like hanging out with actually our customers because we think of tenants as customers too. So to some extent, it kept me grounded. But I would say it was really hard because in those first couple of years, every dollar the company makes, you invest it back into the company. And it's sort of like actually building up your real estate portfolio at the same it's exact same thing. Every time you get more money, you have the option to say, "Oh, I can do a renovation on my primary home like my primary home, or I could go buy another rental property." And it was very similar. We continued to do the same thing where I would just take the money and put it back into Hemlane. And I don't think very many partners would do that, like my husband. Now, my husband, I don't think a lot of them would understand that and take those sacrifices early on. And I think the reason he did it was he knew I was so passionate about it. And he knew that, hey, you can always go to plan B, you can always go to plan C, but if you do that too early, you're always going to have a what if. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, the early years are really hard because you have to do everything: your customer success, your sales, your helping on product and design. But through it all, it makes you just a bigger and better person by doing everything. And that's why I even think there's a lot of parallels to investing in real estate. At the beginning, I do recommend you do it all. You understand the lease contracts, you understand applications, because it just makes you a better real estate investor and it makes me a better entrepreneur. People say, "How do you know everything going on in the company?"
Mhm.
And I say, "You have to." Because for an investor, like if I whoops forgot about this part of the business and it's not doing well, or I don't know what's going on in it, I mean, that's my responsibility to our shareholders to
Mhm.
make sure. And so I think it is very important, and you should treat your real estate investments the same way, where you need to know everything and set up the processes. Once they're set up and you have the reports and metrics, then you take the back seat. But at the beginning, you need to know how it all works. Well, why does the contract say that? Should we change that language? What are the pros and
Mhm.
cons? So just asking the whys, I think, are really important in the beginning days.
Folks, Himlane's an amazing platform. Lots of one rental at a time fans use it. More of you should give it a trial run. Where can they get the 14-day trial just to practice and see all the things that are there?
Yeah, you can go to Hemlane, HEMLANE.com, and just mention one rental at a time for 20% off your first year. But you do get to try it for free. So just
Yep.
go on and give it a try.
Yep. Give it a try. 14 days. Get your friends to play along. Practice being a landlord. Doesn't hurt. Thanks, Dana.
Thanks so much.